without further ado, let's learn about the default mode network. It has a lot to do with autobiographical and emotional thinking and our imagination. Which, like, the name of the network doesn't really seem to have anything to do with that, right? But actually, this is what it's all about. It's another one of those things where they named it when they first saw it, and then later when they did more research on it and found out more about it, it actually turns out it's a little bit different than what they originally thought it was. So, here we go. Sorry, geez. So the default mode network was described somewhere in the early 2000s. Since then, it's been researched a lot more, but that's kind of where the phrase was coined and the research started, you know? They noticed that this was, or they thought that this was kind of only seen, or activity in this network was only seen in what would be called task negative situations, or where you're not doing anything, where your brain is at rest, where you're not doing, where you're just not performing any function, doing anything at all, right? That's kind of what your brain was doing when it's not doing anything. So, but really this network of portions in our brain, these three areas right here that we're going to talk about in just a bit, okay? Exactly, yeah, this is your brain on nothing, exactly. So this network is associated with thinking about yourself or other people, associated with autobiographical memories, or memories about yourself and your experiences, emotional states of yourself and other people, and also contemplation and imagination. So a lot more than just nothing going on here, in my opinion. Okay. So basically this network is active during active during these sorts of actions that require these skills and areas, thinking about yourself or others, thinking about emotional states, imagining things, thinking about social situations, all that stuff. Tends to be suppressed during what would be called externally focused, like goal-oriented actions. Like if you're really focusing on something external, these areas tend to be suppressed, depending on the nature of what you're focusing on. Sometimes it isn't suppressed. It depends on what the content of that externally focused task is. Okay. So more about the default mode network. It was thought to kind of mediate daydreaming, right? You guys, I mean, everybody here has daydreamed at some point. You guys know what that is, yeah? Where you're just sitting, not really thinking about anything. You kind of like snap out of it, realize like, oh, geez, I was like not paying attention to anything going on around me. I was all in my head. I wasn't really thinking about anything else. I was thinking about something that happened to me, imagining some good thing in the future, imagining something I'm dreading in the future, imagining this nasty thing that happened in the past, remembering this fun experience in the past, thinking about what would happen if I did this thing and that thing, and like dreaming about this possibility that could happen, you know, like all those things you do when you're bored or something isn't capturing your attention enough and you just drift off and daydream, right? So yeah, this is kind of thought to mediate that process, daydreaming, right? But what do you guys think in chat? Is that a passive process or is that an active process? Is this something that you just do and don't really put any effort into? Does it serve no purpose? Or is it something that your brain actually has to work at? Does it actually serve a purpose? Does it do some good for us? What do you guys think? Put your answers in chat. I want to hear that from you. Okay. And also, what's accomplished during this self-generated, what we call self-generated thought? Like, what's the point of it? Is there a point? Or is it just kind of filler? You know? What do you guys think about that? Tell me. Welcome and happy dose. Good to see you. I think there isn't anything in research that says this, but I think that this knowledge of the default mode network helps to further dispel that old "you only use 10% of your brain" adage that isn't really thrown around too much anymore, but I kind of keep coming back to. So I think it helps to dispel that some, because clearly, like, you're using your brain all the time. Even during daydreaming, there's a substantial part of your brain being active, right? So I think that this helps further dispel that, just as an aside. And again, this is thought to be active when your brain isn't under cognitive load, but isn't it though? I mean, I think it is. Isn't it doing something still? I don't think, and I've read a lot of other material that says this as well. Cognitive load shouldn't just focus on externally focused tasks, you know? Your brain is still doing something when you're daydreaming, quote unquote, when the default mode network is engaged, you know, when you're just lost in your thoughts. Your brain's still doing something. And it's a good thing because there's an estimated it's estimated about 30 to 50% of people's daily time is spent in this kind of thought, you know, non-task oriented thought. You're just kind of thinking about what happened to you, what's going to happen to you, what could happen to you. You're using your imagination, all that stuff. So it's more than just daydreaming. It's more than just, you know, wasting time away and being in your own head. It's more than that. It is. Let me catch up with chat for a bit. Good to see you, Happy Dose. Welcome on in. Glad to see you. We missed you. How you doing? Hope you're doing well. Senior Moore just says, looks passive. When I daydream, I can make really vivid images that I can do just by wanting. Yeah, exactly. You can, but if you said you're making them, right? That's not just a passive process. That's you doing something with those images, right? You're actively using your brain for that. Also, I saw that raid from Ethanol. Thank you for coming on over, Ethanol and friends. Good to see you. Welcome on in, guys. How was your stream today, Ethanol? Draco, can we shout out Ethanol, please? It's good to see you, man. I was in the middle of a slide, so I couldn't reach you just then, but good to see you. Metatron says, I think the reason is to waste time and be less bored, but I don't think it is. I don't think it's about wasting time. No. I think that we as a culture, more and more the world over, sees that as a waste of time, but like, isn't that where you have like those aha moments where you think of those big ideas? Isn't it? I think it is. You know, just going back over information you hadn't thought about for a while, or just putting information together, thinking about things in relation to you, thinking about experiences, like thinking about that crazy idea you have, like, and you're seeing yourself putting it into action. Like, that's where you get those moments of inspiration from, you know? Happy Dose says, usually what the brain does is for a reason. Yes, I always say that as well. Yes, we just don't understand all those reasons yet. Yes. And it definitely involves more than 10% of the brain at any one time. Your brain is always using all of your brain to some extent, you know? Your brain, there's never a part of your brain that isn't doing something, you know? Senior Mortis says, it's not that I'm making what I want. The images come to your mind and they are very real. Yeah. But your mind is actively making those things seem real to you. It's not just, oh, time to just, it's happening. Like, no, your brain is actually like working with that information and synthesizing that for you. It's working with it, you know? It's engaging these parts of your brain, the default mode network, to make that happen, you know? Gemini said, thinking about who would win in a fight, Batman or Obi-Wan with the high ground. It's tough. It's a tough choice, right? So yeah, maybe not all of this is super goal oriented, but hey, you know, if Gemini were to get some grand idea based on that silly sounding idea and run with it, boom, you know, there could be something great that came about because of that, you know. On the conscious level, I'd seen your margin. It sounds like it's on a very conscious level, you know. That's the whole thing about this, is that it's a very conscious thing. This isn't just your subconscious doing it. Like, you're actually conscious of what you're thinking about. You are, you know. Are you externally focused? No, because that's part of your brain isn't really as active during this part, you know. But and it feels different, you know. If you snap out of a daydream and come back to like what seems like reality, it might seem like you were just like lost in your mind and not doing anything, but you kind of are. You really are doing something, you know. Is it as productive as other things? Maybe not, but still. Ethanol says, I daydream about gunfights a lot. Okay, yeah. Having been through a few yourself, yeah, that's something your mind probably wanders to once in a while. Does the idea of the subconscious even still exist in modern psychology? I thought that term was basically outdated. I think it does, Gemini, yeah. I think it does. I think, what was I going to say? Psychotherapy is still practiced today. It looks a little different, but it's still there. Happy Dose says, so the brain's basically always taking in information, taking in sensations, always, yes. We're not always 100% conscious of them, like we talked about that when we talked about proprioception, right? You know, you don't always consciously feel where your body is, but if you need to know where your body is at any one point, it's got that information ready for you. It's just not making it up to your frontal lobes for you to be conscious of and work with, because it doesn't need to. Maybe daydreaming is what happens when that amount of intake is low. The brain fills itself up with self-generated sensation because the brain really does need sensory input. Or, I mean, yeah, it's kind of what the brain does in its downtime, you know? If it's seeing like, this isn't really important for me to focus on right now, let's go back through and rehash that stuff that we've done before. Let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's process it again. Let's work with it differently. You know, that's where imagination comes from. This is the seat of imagination. This is where it happens, you know? So, yeah, there isn't something actively taking control of your attention, which that network, the dorsal attention network can get fatigued, and it's hard for you to pay attention after a while, then yeah, you might go back to what's the default mode network, or your default way of thinking, which is internally focused, rehashing some of that autobiographical information, and giving your more active attention networks a bit of a rest for a while. I don't think that's something that's talked about either, is that this would give your other more externally focused attention executive networks a bit of a rest, because they need that too. You can't be on and focused externally all the time. You can't. Like, you get exhausted, you get fatigued, you start to make mistakes. This gives us a chance to check out, and you work on other stuff instead. It's like, working out with your right arm for a while, that one gets tired. Okay, you work out with your left arm. You're still working out, you're still doing something, but you're just not using that same part. So, in a very loose metaphor there. But same principle in my opinion. Anyways, next slide. I'm going to get through one or two more. I'll check back in with chat. Again, feel free to keep throwing those questions and comments in there. I love them. But I'll be checking back in with you guys in a minute, okay? So more about that. This picture, by the way, I realized I didn't put in here what this picture is, but this is just a different brain scan, kind of showing these yellow glob-looking things are just areas of the brain activated. Here would be the front of the brain and the back of the brain. This is a view a posterior view of the brain, and this is a ventral view of the brain where you're looking at it from the bottom up. These are just the different parts of the brain activated, or the different core parts of the brain activated in the default mode network when it's active, okay? And we're going to go over what those are, but these are just another pictorial representation of where is activated when the default mode network is engaged, and you're engaged in thinking about yourself and others, and autobiographical thoughts, imagining, contemplating, all those things, okay? So thinking about the past tends to go along with negative mental content. We talked about this, actually. This was a question of the day we had a while ago, but research has shown thinking about the past tends to precede and go along with negative mental content. Thinking about the future tends to precede more positive mental content. Tends to. Not always that way, but it tends to, right? So thus, people that think about the past more tends to have a bit more negative thoughts in general. People that think about the future more tends to have more positive mental thoughts or mental content. Not always that way, though. Also, people with depression tend towards thinking about the past more. That's where that rumination comes in, right? And research has also shown some differences in people with generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. They have more difficulty thinking about the future with positive thoughts, right? And that has to do with the default mode network too, because if you're thinking about yourself and your past, or yourself and your future, which is where that happens in this default mode network, what might precede those negative or positive thoughts, depending on what you're thinking about. Your thoughts make your feelings, and your feelings make your thoughts. It really does. As I was saying, this does work opposite other attention or externally focused attention mediating networks, like the dorsal attention network. There's such a thing as being anti-correlated. There's anti-correlation, where when one is active, the other is inactive, and vice versa. Okay, and we're going to talk about that a bit more later. Okay, so there's a core system in the default mode network, which is shown here, and we're going to talk about those brain bits in the next few slides. There are also two subsystems. We're going to talk about those in their own separate slides as well. Okay, let me catch up with chat. That's all I'll say. I think I like to think that you can stay on. I don't know. Maybe somebody can take a brain scan of me when I go outside or I go to work, just waiting for somebody to stick you up. Yeah, ethanol. Maybe your brain works differently than most people's. Yeah. You've talked about before, you get the hypervigilance and stuff like that, so maybe your brain does stay on more than others, and you spend a little bit less time engaging your default mode network. I, however, am not hypervigilant, and I spend quite a bit of time in the default mode network. Probably not thinking about things I should be, Maybe I'm not thinking forward thinking as much as I am. But I think that's the way it is for a lot of people, is that you're not on all the time. Maybe some people are. But I think that's unusual. I would say that is. Just like it's also unusual to never be externally focused and always be lost in your own thoughts, Where if you have like the inattentive subtype of ADHD or something else like that, where you just have trouble shifting your attention to where it needs to be, I mean, some people can do this over much. There's probably a spectrum in where people engage their default mode network and where they don't, you know, when they don't, rather. Gemini said that I've read that meditation is correlated with an immediate reduction in default mode network activity that persists for some hours afterwards. Hey, stop getting ahead of us, Gemini. Jeez. And we're going to talk about that later, actually. Yeah, I've seen research on that as well. Yep. It's an interesting point, says Gemini, since it's a common stereotype that people who daydream are a lot less aware of their surroundings. And necessarily, you know, if you're daydreaming, like, your ability to focus outwardly is actually like shut down some. We're going to talk about that more. Like, those two subsystems those two systems are actually anti-correlated. So yeah, if you're daydreaming, then you're not really focusing as much on the world around you. You're going to rely on something really salient to bring you back to reality, which I'm sure you guys have all experienced. You've been like really like involved in your own thoughts, and all of a sudden, oh, like you snap back when something happens, like, oh crap. And you're really disoriented for a second because you really weren't paying attention to what was happening around you, you know? It wouldn't surprise me if there's something to this and road hypnosis too, where like you're just driving to work and you might get in your car and start driving to work, and then you get to your workplace and you're like, oh, I don't remember even driving here. I didn't even recall that happening. Because you weren't thinking about it, you know? Your brain's on autopilot and you're just waiting for some salient information to snap you back to reality. So yeah, me too, Happy Dose. I don't know. I wonder if hypervigilance is negatively correlated with daydreaming too. It wouldn't surprise me. I wonder if anybody's had any interest in studying daydreaming in individuals suffering from PTSD. I bet somebody has. It wouldn't surprise me. I bet that research is out there. As a kid, Gemini says, I used to be really bad about that. One time I had a bus driver literally screaming in my face I needed to move up to the front of the bus. He got super pissed because he thought I was ignoring him, but I literally couldn't hear him. Exactly, right? Default mode network. I was really engaged for you. You were really lost in there thinking about something, you know? And you just were not coming back to reality. Now, different question. Did that bus driver do that kind of thing a lot? Was that commonplace on the bus? Was it commonly like pretty rambunctious in there? I hated riding the school bus as a kid. Ugh, that sucked. I don't like that at all. Alright. On to the next slide. Oop. It's pretty common that some school bus drivers want everybody to stay towards the front so they can keep an eye on them. Yeah. I was talking more about the way the noise level of the bus, I guess, the chaos level of the bus, the way that the bus driver communicated. Were those things typical of him, her or her? I assume it was a him. Or no, is that just different? Sat down, kind of went into your own world, just didn't hear the driver trying to tell you to move up. Okay. Maybe it wasn't then. No, not typical? Okay, got it. Let's see, if that was typical behavior of what was going on, then it might be easier for your brain to tune that out. If it's always chaotic like that, then you learn that that's normal and you don't pay as much attention to it. But it sounds like you were just really deep in there. You were just lost to the world for a while. Also, quest time for whoever's ready. And I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, we're going to talk about the first part. The first portion of the default mode network involves the medial prefrontal cortex. This is the first core portion of the default mode network. Okay. The medial prefrontal cortex, which includes the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, shown here. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, this is what we call a sagittal section of the brain. We're looking at a brain split in half from the top, and then we're looking at it from the side. Okay, actually be this side. So the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex is involved. So dorsal being towards the top, and then medial in the middle of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex, the front portion of the frontal cortex. Okay. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, so the ventral counterpart to the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex. Also the medial medial orbito prefrontal cortex. Named as such because it's right above your eye sockets, which are called orbits, or anatomically sometimes. So things that are, if you hear orbito in a neuroscience term, it's usually referring to the space right above your eye sockets. Okay. So these three areas right here are basically make up the medial prefrontal cortex. Okay, we're going to refer to this picture again when we're talking about other areas of the default mode network, mainly these three areas back here. We're not going to, the dorsal and ventral anterior cingulate cortex aren't going to come up today, but these just happen to be labeled in this picture because that's what I could find. But yeah, these don't really come up today. But these other ones, the posterior cingulate cortex, the precuneus, and the retrosplenial cortex, we're definitely going to talk about those. Okay, so these three areas, or the medial prefrontal cortex as a whole, is involved grossly in thinking about the mental states of others, especially those we see as similar to us, otherwise known as, if you guys haven't heard of it, theory of mind. Okay. Also involved in self-referential thinking and knowledge of ourself. Okay, so it's involved in thinking about ourselves and others. Also, imagination happens here of goals, states, and actions. That's where we're able to kind of use our brain's Photoshop, our brain's Adobe Premiere, and kind of put together a scene that could happen based on things that we know. We're able to use what we got, Photoshop it, Premiere it together, cut it together, and hey, here's a new scene that could happen. I could make reality, maybe, or here's something that I really wish would have happened. You know, that's a way I like to think about imagination. Also, integration of new perceptual information coming in from our senses and things like that gets integrated with our autobiographical information, the things that we already know and things we've experienced, things we felt, and we put our own personal spin on those things. So the new things coming in that we experience get added into our existing schema, and that's where this, in large part, happens. You know, especially emotionally and using autobiographical information from our memory and such. Okay, so the VMPFC and orbital PFC are for decision making based on perceived value. Okay, and we talked about that before, where these parts of our brain, whenever we experience something, whether it be an object we like, a food, a smell, a being around another person, a sight that we see, something like that, whatever, a thought or an emotion, whenever we experience those things, this is the part of the area that helps us decide, do we like that thing? Do we benefit from this? Is this good for us? Or do we not like this thing? It's not good for us. We don't like it, you know? This is where that value is assigned, okay? And that's where we answer these questions. Is it a good or bad thing? Is it going to make us better or worse based on a past experience, based on things we've experienced before? Is it good for us or is it not good for us? Okay? So that's one big area, that's one core area of the default mode network, is the medial prefrontal cortex, okay? Let me check back in with chat here. Ethel said, it strikes me as odd that people aren't as interested in watching their flanks as I am. People, by and large, don't have to in America, man. But I get you. I get you. You had that drilled into you for a while, and it was literally life or death for you sometimes. Most people don't have to do that. So it's, I mean, and people might be watching their flanks cursorily, but not as intently as you are, you know? Close there, guys. I think you just need a word ending on that. There it is, Gemini, got it. Myelin sheathing. That's the one. The bot is very, very explicit on those. I do see you guys took out Tortoiseshell Tansy. Never soloed that quest, which means Fatboy gets his last glucosamine tablet for tonight. And y'all get some kitty cam while he eats it. Thank you guys for donating again to Fatboy's Fat Belly Fund, dedicated to keeping him the fattest little lab assistant on Twitch. He appreciates it, I appreciate it, you all love it. It's a win-win-win. Oh, I'm so glad that you think of these as treats, buddy. Makes taking these very easy. It's good, he's got to take 4 of those a day. Mackenzie, good to see you, my friend. How you doing? Welcome on in. Never's dad was a military man. Ingrained that in you, okay? Nearly 30 years old, still do that out of habit? Makes sense. Oh, okay. Gemini has a friend who used to be in the military. When you go to a restaurant, you always had to sit facing the entrance? Okay. Yeah. Makes sense, I guess. Like I said, you get that stuff ingrained in you and it kind of never goes away. Makes sense. Yeah. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I can associate with that, but I mean, I can understand the concept for sure. Fat boy, come back. Oh man, I was going to leave you guys with some kitty cam. I got to use the bathroom real quick, but I was going to leave you guys with some kitty cam, but I guess I can't. Sorry, guys. Mackenzie, I'm doing well too. Doing well. A lot more settled down now. Lesson's going well so far. It's a brand new one. I worked hard to put this together, so I hope you guys are enjoying it and learning and stuff. And like I said, I have to use the bathroom real quick, so I'll be right back. Feel free to ask any questions in chat if you thought of them. If you're looking up things online to go with this, go right ahead. Don't be afraid to ask questions that you feel like I might get to in the future. The worst that's going to happen is I'll tell you that I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But feel free to make your own observations, make your own connections, ask those questions, and keep that chat going. And if not, you just want to listen, that's cool too. I'll see you guys in just a minute, okay? I'm going to go take a bathroom break, say hi to Mrs. Beta and all that stuff, and I'll be right back, okay? See you. Bye. Welcome back, everybody. Oh, there's the question of the day. Thank you for asking that, Draco. We haven't heard that yet. Yep, if you can ask your pet 3 questions, what would they be? And Draco doesn't have a pet. Okay, well, there's that. I mean, use your imagination if you want to. That's okay. Anybody can ask their pets questions, says Gemini. Just getting them an answer is the real trick. Yeah, I get. Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, if you could ask your pet 3 questions and they would answer you, what would you ask them? Yes, happy dose. They ask their kitties all kinds of things. They usually answer with meows. Okay, sure. Maine Coons always seem like super talkative kitties. Yeah, I see that. Pet Boy's also pretty talkative. Is there a typo in the question? Oh, if you could ask you pet. That's correct. If you could ask you pet 3 questions. Okay, fight me. Yeah, I got that together a little bit last minute. Boom, there it is again. Oh, good boy. Mackenzie can't because they don't have pets either. Okay, want some kitties though? I want you to have some kitties too. Indeed. Fight me IRL, bro. You definitely got the, I think you have the aerobic strength on lockdown, man. I think I could go 10 rounds with you. Gerba said, how can I do better? All right. Do you love me? Oh. 3, the medicine tastes bad, but it's good for you. They would just use that last question to tell their pets, you just need to do this, okay? You just got to do it. If I could ask Fat Boy 3 things, it would be 1, are you comfortable and happy right now? 2, what can I do to make life better for you? Kind of like Gerbo said, the first question. And 3, this one's kind of important to me, but a little bit morbid. When do you want to, like, when do you want me to end your life? Like, when do you want to go, you know? Like, at what point do you want your life to be over? You know? Like, that's what I would want to know, because I don't want him to, like, suffer more than he wants to suffer. He's getting older. He's already got a bum leg, you know? Like, what can I do? When would I know? When can you tell me, you know? While we have this brief opportunity to talk with one another, you know? Explain that to me. All I want is for this guy to be happy and comfortable, you know? He's been good to me. I want to be good to him. But I can't read his mind, you know? Draco said, if I did have a pet and could understand them, I would ask them, is there anything they could do to improve their homes? Okay. Are they happy? And do they enjoy the name they were given? Good one. Okay. Yeah. Do you enjoy that name you have that you had no say in having? And you really can't change? It's something we never really stop and think about. Like, do we enjoy our own names growing up? Don't really ever think about that. It just kind of is, you know? And we're given that before we have a say in it. You can always change it later, I guess, if you want to, and you're an adult, or before you're an adult with your parents' consent, but, you know. Never says my cat's a people name, so hopefully they like them. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe my cat doesn't like being called Fat Boy, but I mean, that's his name, and that is what it is. Oh, good boy. Senior Morgan has 2 kitties, Nietzsche and Newton. I like it. Science and philosopher kitties. Oh, a good boy. Nietzsche's the ones that respond to the name. Okay. You got it. All right. I thought that question was good. I like your answers to those guys. Happiness, that'd be a good question. What names do you want me to call you by? Yeah, there we go. Instead of like, do you like your name more, or instead of yeah, what do you like your name is more like, do you want to change your name? Do you want a different name? You know. What names do you want me to call you by? Hopefully, I'll be able to pronounce them. If we don't speak meow, unfortunately. Mackenzie's one question would ask is, do you understand English? A question many scientists would like to know too. A pertinent one for sure. Good thinking, Mackenzie. See? Weird question, but it makes you think, right? Anyways, while you guys are thinking more on that question or anything else that might come to your mind if you're engaging your default mode network or not, okay? I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So the next portion of the core network of the default mode network is the posterior cingulate cortex. So not the anterior cingulate cortex here, but the posterior portion of it, right here. And I've shown up here, the posterior portion of it here. Okay, that's that. So there's a ventral and dorsal portion of this, the ventral portion, of course, being near the bottom of the brain, dorsal portion being towards the top. Okay. The ventral portion is involved in thinking and remembering about self or others, so autobiographical thinking, or recalling information about yourself or others, and thinking about the past or future. Processing concepts, so there's a lot of sensory and vocabulary information coming in there as well, which makes sense given where it's located. And also some spatial navigation, okay? Also making sense given where it's located, right by the occipital lobe, located in the dorsal stream of the visual cortex, the visual processing stream, okay? That's what the ventral portion is concerned with. The dorsal portion involved in a lot of involuntary or bottom-up awareness, or basically things being brought to your attention by your senses, okay? Also, and arousal, so integration of incoming sensory information and deciding what to respond to. Makes sense, it's kind of near the reticular activating system, which plays a large part in that. And also the precuneus is involved in this in a roundabout way. This is the precuneus here highlighted in red, the medial and posterior portion of the parietal lobe, located right there. Also located here, you can see that spelled out precuneus there as well. So this bit right here. Not the entirety of the posterior parietal lobe. This is the cuneus, this is the precuneus. Not talking about the cuneus, no. Not that part. So it doesn't butt right up against the occipital lobe. That's a different portion. Okay. But also the precuneus, located here, that's involved in integrating more of that sensory information and also helping to shift our attention and stuff like that. Okay. So this is more involved in like spatial thinking and adding in the spatial piece of this of the dorsal motor, or the dorsal, sorry, gosh dang it, I keep messing up the acronym for the default mode network. I'm still not used to saying that yet. Right? It's more like sensory and spatial and attention modulation portion of the default mode network. Okay. Let me catch up with chat real quick. Hope it's a quick one. Happy Toast knocking that neuroscience question out of the park. Good on you. Astrocytes help make up the blood-brain barrier. Indeed, sure does. If y'all were here for that talk for our talk on that, you might know that one. Also, quest time for whoever's ready. Exclamation point quest to join. Alright, the last main portion, the last core portion of the default mode network, I did it, is the angular gyrus, located right here in orange. And it might be a little bit bigger than that too. Okay, so it looks like the same area as the precuneus, except it's not a medial portion of the parietal lobe, it's the outer portion of the cortex, okay, or the lateral portion, okay. Yeah, angular gyrus for the most part right here, which corresponds to these little areas here on the sides we were seeing earlier. Okay, there's angular gyrus. This music sounds like Risk of Rain music. I like it. Alright, so this kind of connects other core areas of the default mode network to different sensory and spatiotemporal processing areas of the brain. So it's kind of the bridge to other sensory areas of the brain. Thanks for checking us out. Appreciate that. The core areas in total, or as together, are hypothesized at least to kind of give us our sense of self and personal meaning, right? Thanks for checking us out. Appreciate that. Yeah, the core areas kind of help give us our personal meaning, right? Help us to decide who we are, decide where we belong in this world, decide what the world means to us, what other people mean to us. What do things mean to us? You know, what do our experience? How do our experiences shape us? What do those mean to us? What's important to us? What's not important to us? Right? This is where we get that from. This is, you know, this going back and reshaping all these autobiographical memories and living through them again. Spending this time, quote unquote, daydreaming helps give us that personal meaning in things. Helps us form our sense of self. You know. helps us to update that ongoing personal meaning, I guess, with upcoming new information coming in, new experiences, new loves, new losses, new smells, sights, sounds, all that, right? You can go out and have one experience tonight, and that might change your personal meaning, what you're meant to do on this planet, where you're meant to be, what you've been doing with your life. You know, people have epiphanies like that, right? There's gonna be the seed of that. That one experience can change everything you've shaped about yourself in all your dealings with your default mode network over your whole life, right? This is where that happens, or this is what forms that personal meaning to be changed during that epiphany in the first place, right? At least that's the hypothesis. You know, it's hypothesized that that's the perception of this working, right? Anyways, I see you guys took out a fabulous feline fencer Felicia, which means this little fat one right here gets a treat. Yeah, I'll get some kitty cam. Thank you guys for donating again to Fat Boy's Fat Belly Fund, dedicated to keeping him the fattest little neuroscientist on Twitch. He appreciates it, I appreciate it, you all love it. It's a win-win-win. Alright, and on with the next one. So there's two subsystems, okay? I talked about that earlier. Those are the three core portions of it. Whoop, hang on. The medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the angular gyrus. Those are the core subsystem. There's two subsystems also, okay? There's a medial temporal subsystem. Just going to go in the middle portion of the temporal lobe. You can see a lot of connections here going to that area. And there's also the dorsal medial subsystem. Just going to go along the dorsal portion of the brain and the medial portion of the brain. Okay, we're going to go through those, and each of those has their own function as well. Okay, each of these subsystems is strongly connected up to the medial prefrontal cortex for the imagery and association, all that stuff when we're thinking about ourselves and our past, our future, using our imagination, all that stuff. Okay, so strongest integration there, but also totally connects with the posterior cingulate cortex as well. Okay. And this is kind of where the tangible, and there's supposed to be a slash there, but tangible/intangible pieces of our memory and thoughts are gathered, perceived, put together, and made available to the core subsystem for us to parse out, think about, imagine with, Photoshop, all that good stuff together in our mind. Okay, so we'll go through each one of the subsystems right now. Medial temporal subsystem first. We're going to talk about that. Okay, this is actually coming over a little too far. I'll fix that later. The areas included, or the areas indicated here, these all interface with the core areas of the default mode network, including the hippocampus, which is responsible for long-term memory. Also, it's the area that hippos go to. We know that hippopotamus goes to get its education, right? The parahippocampus and the retrosplenial cortex help give us some spatial recognition and navigation. Also, we know that the parahippocampus is the place that a hippopotamus goes to learn how to skydive. We know that too. Okay. Posterior inferior parietal lobe. Those are responsible for integration of visual, auditory, and touch info. Okay, a lot of that comes together there. And that's kind of around the posterior inferior parietal lobe is very, very close to the angular gyrus. It's kind of the same area. It's a very big sensory integration area. It's right there at the junction of the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the parietal lobe, where there's a lot of auditory and vocabulary, a lot of touch information, a lot of sight information is coming together. It's where all that comes together. Okay, and also ventromedial prefrontal cortex is indicated here as well. That's for thinking about ourselves. We already talked about that. Okay. So put together these areas, help us put together the picture of what's going on when we recall things, when we imagine things. So it gives us that visual information, right? When you imagine something in your mind, or you go back to a moment in your past, or anything like that, you have a story or something described to you, and you're visualizing that in your head, right? If you don't have a picture to go along with, right? These are the parts of the area that are giving you that picture, right? It's very important that you have that too, you know? Working with students with language disorders and people with autism and stuff like that, a lot of times they don't have that. Like, they don't have a picture in their head to go along with what's being said or described or experienced, right? When they're imagining something. So, and if they don't have that picture available, it's harder for them to kind of relate and tell that story back, which is why story composition and comprehension as well. Those are both kind of difficult for people that don't have this subsystem functioning properly, or can't visualize things like that very well, right? They don't have that picture to go along with it. It's just harder for them to put that back together. It's harder to synthesize that, right? And again, this whole subsystem helps us to form memories at all because it includes the hippocampus, which is, as we know, the area that lets long-term potentiation and consolidation, which is where we get our long-term memories from in the first place, happen. So let me catch up with chat and we'll continue with the next subsystem of the default mode network in just a moment. Watching you games, good to see you. How are you? Good to see you. No need to be sorry. It's all good. This is a teaching portion that I haven't done yet, so I do want to upload this to YouTube and Reddit for people to watch, and I want to make sure it's digestible, so no need to worry watching you games. I'll just get to you when I can, okay? Good to see you. You're back, Smart Arts? That's okay. I'm glad. Sorry if you missed anything. That's okay. Glad you're back. Had a phone session with your psychologist. I hope it went well, okay? Hope it went well. That's more important than being here learning with us, okay? No worries. I'd like to ask something about this? Please do. This is the time. Happy Dose found a kitty, you know the drill. Or maybe you don't know the drill, but if you want to put in chat and the name of your kitty that you would like to have added to the kitty club and the type of kitty, I'd be happy to add that for you, okay? Let us know. Let us know. But yeah, Smart Arts, I will wait a second for that question, okay? Feel free to ask, and if I don't hear it in a minute, that's okay, no worries. I'll move on with the next slide. After that, I will come back and answer that question. Okay, there it is. Your son was abused when he was 6 weeks old. I am freaking sorry about that. That is horrendous. Very sorry to hear that. Sustained life-threatening brain damage. God damn it. I'm very sorry. Dude, screw that person that did that to your son. I'm very sorry. As a result, now he has severe scarring in the front area of his brain on the left side. Okay, and some in the middle. So running what I think the effects would be. I can't say. I can't say. Nobody can say what the effects are going to be, you know? It could be a lot of stuff, you know? See the front left side of his brain, that's frontal lobe. That tends to be the seat of, well, front left side is language, production of language. Can be, depending on where exactly it happened. That's where a lot of executive functioning happens, a lot of thinking about themselves and others, a lot of attention happens, inhibition, things like that. So a lot of different functions are housed up there, and nobody can really say how it's going to happen, you know? Yeah, what's the front of the brain used for? Usually those kind of things. Usually executive function, thinking about others, social piece. On the left side specifically, production of language in Broca's area. Those are the same kind of things, right? But I can't say for sure what's going to happen, you know, of course. I don't think you're expecting me to do that, but you know, given your son was 6 weeks old when it happened, 6 months, 6 weeks old. I mean, that's good that he was 6 weeks old. It's not good that it happened, but it happened at 6 weeks old. So that's better because he's got the rest of his life for his brain to grow and accommodate around that as he grows, you know? So maybe there'll be little to nothing that happens. I couldn't say, you know, it depends on how plastic the brain is, how wondrous a little brain he's got in the first place, the upbringing from there. It depends on a lot of different stuff. And so I couldn't really say. I'm hoping that little to no deficits in those areas, but there could also be some overall deficits. And really you have nothing to compare it to, you know? How do you know that he wouldn't have some difficulties in those areas in the first place? You know, I don't know. It's too tough to say. I couldn't say. A lot of stuff could happen. More or less a vegetable till he's 18 months old. Yikes. Then one day a light just went on. Mm-hmm. Yep, that makes sense. It's unfortunate that took so long, but yeah, his brain was just trying to accommodate that damage, right? And I'm glad that it's back up and engaging and learning and all that stuff. Thank you for adding that kitty, Draco. Appreciate that. And we add it. Okay, yeah, thank you for adding that. 757th kitty, happy dose. Now, anytime anybody uses the exclamation point kitty command, that's a kitty that might come up and be interacted with. Nibby, welcome on in. Good to see you. Unofficial Colty raid. Good to see you, Nibby. How are you? Welcome on in. Good to see you. Almost 40 now. Okay, geez, that was a while ago then. Suddenly again, he's changed for the better. Good, like a light went on. Okay. And so did he have a lot of difficulties going on in his life when he's growing up then? The brain rerouting? Yeah. That's what it would be. Yep. Yep, the brain is plastic throughout our lives, mostly when we're little kiddos. You know, the younger the better. Thanks for checking us out, appreciate that. Yeah, mostly when you're a little kiddo, but throughout your life, your brain is plastic. I mean, if it wasn't, you wouldn't be able to assimilate new language, you know, or new knowledge you wouldn't be able to learn, you know. So our brain can change throughout our life. Had some deficit, okay, you'd bang his head for hours and hours. Yikes, that's pretty tough. Yeah, especially with more head banging, that's just going to cause more damage to the brain. That's unfortunate. Sorry to hear that, Smart Arts. Jeez. Very sorry, but it's a good thing he had you to lean on and take care of him and all that stuff and do the best you could with him, you know? And 40 years ago, so much less was known about this kind of stuff too. So, yeah. I'm sorry that happened to him, Smart Arts. Sorry about that. Of course, not sorry for that, but just sorry that happened. It's a bummer. Big bummer. But yeah, it wouldn't have surprised me if those kind of things were a bit more difficult. No support? Yeah, exactly. This kind of thing just wasn't... 40 years ago, you know, mental health and stuff, mental illness still wasn't treated very good, you know? Even worse than it is now, and it's still not great now, you know? Now it's stigmatized, but back then it was just like, don't even, just get away from us with it. Don't even talk about that. It's hard, you know? This is grandma? Yikes. Yeah, but you get through. Yeah, it does. You do. Yeah. People that are old school still believe in that hardcore corporal punishment. Yeah, it's not good. No good. Sorry to hear that, Smart Arts. I'm sorry to hear that. Good boy. Anyways, moving on. Next slide right now. More about the medial temporal subsystem. Okay. So what would damage these different parts possibly do for our default mode network, or against it rather? Damage to the hippocampus, as we know in talking about patient HM and stuff, leads to difficulty with not only forming new memories, but also imagining as well. Oh, whoops, I put that in there twice. Silly me. Yeah, difficulty with imagining as well as long-term memory formation and imagining. Okay, so not only does it impair your ability to form new memories, but also impairs your ability to think about the future, they've found. So it's not just that, but also thinking about the future. Interesting stuff. Damage to the parahippocampal cortex down here near the hippocampus, or the retrosplenial cortex right here. Oh, I didn't point those out in the last slide. I'm sorry. Let me do that. The parahippocampal cortex or the parahippocampus would be down here in the ventral portion of the brain near the hippocampus, which is deeper inside the temporal lobe. The retrosplenial cortex is this little brown bit right here, labeled RSC. Retrosplenial for the fact that it's behind retro. The splenium of the corpus callosum, we haven't talked about this yet, but the corpus callosum, this band of myelinated axon, these commissural fibers right here, right, is actually divided up into 4, sometimes 3 different portions. We have the genu up here, or the front portion. We have the body and or the isthmus, depending on where you're looking at, up here on the top. And then we have the splenium back here. Okay, so the retrosplenial cortex is just right behind the splenium of the corpus callosum. That would be it. And then we talked about the posterior inferior parietal lobe, kind of around here, and then, well, actually here. And then the VMPFC we talked about too. Okay, I just realized I didn't point those out for you guys, and there they are. So damage to those 2 areas, the parahippocampal cortex or the retrosplenial cortex, can lead to some pretty hardcore deficits in spatial memory and processing, right? Such a thing as topographical amnesia, especially with damage to the retrosplenial cortex. Makes it really hard for you to learn about new places, learn your way around new places, learn routes. Even as up to doing like paper and pencil mazes makes it very, very difficult to learn. There was a study done on a woman around 60 or so years of age who had pretty localized damage to her retrosplenial cortex, they found, and gave her a pretty simple like paper and pencil maze to do. Could not do it. 275 trials. Just could not get it done. Just could not retain the ability to like do that maze properly. Right? Pretty simple maze too, you know? And they would of course help her every time she needed it, but just could not keep it, you know? So yeah, and there can also be just difficulty with recognizing places they would know. Like you show them landmarks and stuff, they just don't know those anymore. So Just that memory for where and the ability to find your way around places is definitely tied to those places. So, so this whole subsystem is summed up. It's kind of active when we think about experiences or places from our pasts, right? It gives us that where of those places, right? If you think about, like, you know, you have an experience and you think about a place you've been before, and that takes me back, right? Like they do in the movies, right? That's engaging the medial temporal subsystem of your default mode network right there. You think about that scene that you were at before, all those memories associated with it. You get that picture in your mind. That's this all the way. Medial temporal subsystem for sure. Okay. Let me catch up on chat real quick. Absolutely, smart arts does make you stronger for sure. But of course, would you go back and change it? You know, if you can go back and make that not happen for your son, would you do it? It wouldn't surprise me if you would, you know? You take pride in the fact that you had the strength to get through that now and all that, but nobody ever wants that for anybody, right? It sucks. Spatially challenged, you think you are? Yeah, some people are. It is what it is, right? Some people are great at it, some people are not. I'm pretty awesome at it, myself, I think, at least anyways. Other people, not so much. It is what it is. It is what it is. And Happy Dose knocking that neuroscience question out of the park? Of course she is. Of course. Surprising nobody. All right. On to the next slide. The next subsystem. The next subsystem is the dorsal medial subsystem. Okay. We talked about the medial temporal subsystem. Now we're on to the dorsal medial subsystem. Areas indicated here in this subsystem are the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, and also what's called the temporoparietal junction, circled right here. It's the junction between, imaginary junction between the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe, right there, the boundary of those two. Okay, those are really heavily involved in what's called the theory of mind, or thinking about other people's mind or states of mind, right? Okay, I'm actually sure mind states is a word, but it's in there. Fight me. So, the theory of mind, if you haven't heard of this concept before, is basically just being able to infer the thoughts of others, take their perspective, put yourself in their shoes, right? Think about it from their point of view, right? So it's heavily involved in like understanding stories, being able to understand the motivations behind characters, actions and behaviors, beliefs and things like that in books, and also in real life, being able to understand why somebody else does a thing that they do or feel the way that they feel, and being able to, it's kind of the cornerstone to empathy. If you're going to empathize with somebody, you have to understand their viewpoint first to be able to even see it or experience it in the first place, right? And if you can't, then empathy is that much harder. You know, it's more rote. You see like, oh, this situation happened, I should feel this way, versus being able to feel it more intuitively, right? If you didn't already know this and haven't clued into that yet, theory of mind is something that goes, is often seen as a deficit in people with autism, right? Not always. There's some people with autism that are quite empathetic, you know, but it being a spectrum and all that, you know, and people with autism having what are called splinter skills, you know, being really good at certain things and not so great at other things. Sometimes theory of mind or perspective taking is very difficult. It's also pretty difficult for people that aren't on the autism spectrum, in my opinion, you know, people that would be considered neurotypical people. Some people just don't seem to be able to, or don't care to, take the perspective of other people all the time. And it often depends on context too. Anyways, so these pieces put together, this subsystem gives us our memories and our imagination, all the social pieces and stuff like that are present in our memories. It ties those together with words and concepts, right? So this is what the last subsystem gave us, kind of the picture of our memories. This is giving us the words that are used, the feelings associated, the states of mind, the whys of things, you know, those things. The what's the word I'm looking for? Oh gosh, I forgot the word I'm looking for now. The ethics of things, you know, the moral reasoning behind it, like the whys of things, you know. This is what's giving us that piece of our memory, right? Not just who's there and what they were doing, but why they're doing it. What are they thinking? What am I thinking? What are they feeling? What am I feeling? All those things, right? Let me catch up with chat. How do you explain to somebody that's exceptional in one area compared to others, like geniuses? They can't. That's how their brain's wired, you know? They happen to glom onto that one piece of information or that one area of information and love it. intensely, or they just pick up a lot of things naturally, and that happens to be the area that they happen to devote themselves to. I think a lot of genius and a lot of, specialty in one area, or being really good at something, doesn't necessarily just come with they're really smart. I think it's a lot of it is they have a passion for that one thing and they do nothing about it. They do nothing besides that thing. So of course you're going to get good at it, being smart and being able to assimilate knowledge easily really helps. So having an interest in the area really helps too. But to me, anyways, geniuses are kind of a consolidation of being intelligent, gathering and assimilating information really easily, learning easily, because not everybody learns easily, loving the thing that you learn, and also having the work ethic to go along with it. It's like some people don't have all three of those things, and you end up with a less efficacious person in that field. But I think you need at least those three things. There's probably other things too, in order to become a genius. And it's gonna be relatively easy for you to learn it. You have to love that thing you're learning, and also put the time in. You have to have the drive to do it. You have to want to do it all the time. So I think if you have those three things, you have success in it. You're gonna have a lot of success in it. You're gonna become known in that field. You might be seen as a genius. The idiot savant. I don't know. That could be splinter skills. That could be, some people are just naturally good at certain things. Hard to say where that comes from, Is that only in autism? No, not at all. Like we see that in pop culture. We see that in just regular people a lot, Somebody's just happens to pick up something and be really good at something just randomly. Just something they pick up naturally. Who knows, We do happen to see that in an extreme scale in people with autism or people with other developmental disorders and stuff like that, where they do things like a typical person couldn't do, seemingly naturally or innately. I couldn't explain that. This just how their brain was wired. We don't know enough about the brain to say yet. So, but I would argue that we also see that in neurotypical people as well. Just to a lesser degree. I don't know, because there's neurotypical people who are what we call mnemonists, or they never forget anything. They never forget anything. They can remember every single day of the year. They're not on the spectrum or anything. They don't have a developmental disorder. They don't have a cognitive impairment. Nothing like that. But they can still remember every single thing that ever happened to them. Every piece of information throughout their life, every second of their life, they can remember that. Ask them what happened on a certain day of their life years ago. Just give them a random day. They can tell you what happened. How do you explain that? Don't know. So much we don't know about the brain. There sure is. That's why I like teaching about it, to get people to think about it, share what I know about it, get people to think about it. Maybe somebody else will be better at it. Maybe somebody else will take this and run with it. Maybe this will ignite somebody's love for neuroscience. Start them on the road to becoming a genius in this. We need more geniuses in things, especially science, in my opinion. Anyways, on to the next slide. More about the dorsal medial subsystem right here. Okay, more about this. This is heavily tested or involved in what's called the false belief task. Okay, this is one where they would test theory of mind, see if that's intact in people, right? So basically, what they would do is, and I used to give an assessment that asked questions like this for broad language assessment, but also it's just for language assessment because I don't test for autism as a speech therapist. But it's something that they look at for people in the spectrum a lot because it tests theory of mind. So basically you tell them about a story, say hey, so-and-so has a toy, they're playing with it or whatever, then they go outside. Their mom comes in, picks up the toy, they put it away in their toy chest or whatever. Their mom comes in, takes the toy out of the toy chest and puts it under their bed, somewhere else. So their big brother comes in and hides it under the bed. When the kid comes back, where's he gonna look for his toy? He's gonna look where he left it, right? But if you have difficulty with this task, if you have difficulty with theory of mind or this particular subsystem, you might guess, well, he's gonna look under the bed because that's where I saw it. When in reality, you're supposed to take their perspective and say, no, well, that's not where he saw it. He left it in his toy chest and he doesn't know his brother moved it. He's gonna look for it there. When he doesn't find it, he might go look somewhere else. But at first, he's gonna come back and look there. That's kind of the gold standard test of theory of mind that we have right now. is something like that, you know, and it's supposed to let you infer the thoughts of others, take the perspective of others, and go from there. So again, typically difficult in people with autism, or language disorders, or many other things, but often in autism. So yeah, this subsystem again gives us the ability to kind of reflect on our own actions, the actions of others, our motivations, the motivations of others, our own beliefs, the beliefs of others, try and reconcile them when they're different, things like that, right? And gives rise to this concept called mentalizing, right? Where we can kind of do all this in our brain, or we can think about others, our situations, goals, imagine plans and all that stuff, you know, think up the entire Harry Potter series and the entire world that goes with that, right here in the dome piece, right? And so that's kind of what that term refers to, mentalizing. You're just building that whole thing in your mind. You don't need to like physically build it out or anything like that. It helps if you're doing something very complex. But for the most part, that all takes place right here in your mind in that process of mentalizing. Okay. So onto those anti-correlations I was talking about, right? There's when the default mode network is turned on, quote unquote, if it's very active, other networks in the brain are less active. Right? They aren't active at the same time. I might go so far as to say we don't really know what the experience of them being on at the same time is. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I'm not sure. But anyways, the dorsal, not the dorsal medial network, the default mode network shares its time as the dominant network, along with the dorsal attention network, which should be not shown here. And also the frontoparietal control network, which would be shown here as the central executive network. Okay, they kind of refer to the same thing. Okay. So the dorsal attention network, again, not shown here. That's for visuospatial processing. That's what's active when we're like looking at the world around us and scanning scenes, just seeing what's going on around us, right? Very externally focused versus the introspective default mode network. Okay. That's part of what's being activated when you are daydreaming or thinking about your past or your self-generated thoughts, and you snap back to reality, right? Dorsal attention network is part of what's being activated. Okay. And again, you guys have experienced that before. We're talking about this before, that perceptual decoupling, right? Where introspection, or thinking in your own head about yourself and others and things like that, causes a reduced sensory processing. So you hear less of what's going on around you. You're unaware of what's happening around you less visually. You're not feeling as much, right? You're just the sensory processing kind of gets decoupled. You don't really feel it as much unless something really salient happens, right? And that's where that like sudden jolt back to reality comes from, is you suddenly no longer being perceptually decoupled, but actually experiencing everything again, especially sights and sounds. Okay. Yeah, that kind of, when you're in your own head, you kind of experience a little bit less of what's going on around you. I'm sure you guys have all felt that before, right? Yeah. As I catch up with chat, have you noticed that when you're daydreaming? Have you noticed that perceptual decoupling? How you just kind of pay a little bit less attention to what's happening around you? Maybe, I hope not, but maybe in class, or maybe during a conversation if somebody's really boring you and you're imagining not talking to them anymore, or road hypnosis, or during a long trip in the car or something like that. You guys experienced that before? And what did you experience? Let me catch up. You love science, Happy Dose? Me too. I know you do, being a scientist yourself. Of course you do. Indeed. Knocking that neuroscience question out of the park. Good on you. Good on you. Welcome in, Bearded Dragon. Good to see you, buddy. How are you? Hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing well. All right. Let's move on. So the frontoparietal control network, or the central executive network, okay? That's active during more task-oriented activities. And seems to, or is hypothesized to, have kind of a modulatory role between both the default mode network, I'm going to get that right by the end of this, and the dorsal attention network throughout the same task as needed. So this is the frontoparietal control network is kind of what's going to help you switch over from the default mode network to the dorsal attention network and back, right? Because that's the hypothesis. They kind of compared this, actually. They compared the activity of these networks during both visuospatial tasks and autobiographical tasks that kind of required you to have some sort of external focus. They found that the the default mode network and the dorsal attention network were active in corresponding tasks. So the default mode network was activated in autobiographical tasks, that task that kind of involved an external focus, like thinking about how to save money for the future or something like that, where you have to think about your life. That was still active, even though they were externally focused on something. And the dorsal attention network was, of course, was activated during a visuospatial task, whereas the default mode network was suppressed. And the frontoparietal control network was active during both of those tasks, as it was kind of mediating which one of those networks was active at any one time based on the task. Okay. Also, the salience network, which we haven't really talked about too much in stream, we haven't really defined or gone through any of these other networks just yet, but the salience network is also a thing that's thought to mediate switching from introspection, the default mode network, to external focus, and switch on those frontoparietal control network and the dorsal attention network. So there might be, these might overlap a little bit, the salience network and central executive network, or the frontoparietal control network might work together to kind of switch between the default mode network and the dorsal attention network. Network. I'm going to say network 5,000 more times. Okay. So that's kind of the beginnings of how the different networks of our brain help us to modulate our attention and switch attention between tasks. And you better bet that there's some deficits or different ways that these work in disorders of the brain where attention is a difficulty, right? Which we're going to talk about right now. Okay. First up, yeah, a variety of disorders are associated with atrophy or dysfunction in the the default mode network. Okay. Such as in Alzheimer's disease, which we've talked about a little bit here on stream before. We can see some pictures here on the side to kind of represent the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Here we have a typical brain here, right? Cerebral cortex all intact. Get the hippocampus there on this little enfold here. Entorhinal cortex right next to that. Okay, that's a typically developed brain. And then here's one with advanced Alzheimer's. Shrinkage of the cerebral cortex, shrinkage of the midbrain structures, shrinkage of the hippocampus for sure. And due to that, enlarged ventricles, because if there's less neural tissue inside the brain, then there's more space for cerebrospinal fluid to take up. So of course there's going to be larger ventricles. It makes sense. But yeah, that's kind of what ends up happening if you have the Alzheimer's, It's an accelerated pathological atrophy of eventually many portions of the brain, including portions of the default mode network we've been talking about. Nailed it. Often affects the posterior cingulate cortex and the medial temporal subsystem. So a lot of those wheres, a lot of the where portions of autobiographical information, not going to be there. Autobiographical information in the first place, going to be messed up in people with Alzheimer's. And if you've ever spoken to somebody with Alzheimer's, it really is. They misidentify people. They think they know somebody. They don't recognize people that they should know. They aren't able to tell you about themselves anymore. They can't orient to space, time, and location. They may not have been the three things, but they can't orient themselves. Oh, place, person, and time. Yeah, they can't orient to those things. They can't remember who they are, when they are. They don't really know where they are. Right. That the whole thing is thrown off because of damage to those areas, or atrophy in those areas, right? So, also navigation skills for the person with Alzheimer's, good freaking luck. Like, they're not going to know how to get around anywhere eventually. It's going to be very difficult for them because they don't have a great grasp on where they are currently, where they want to go, and what that looks like anymore. That route planning is kind of messed up for them. It's very difficult for them to do because of the atrophy in those areas, right? So that's one piece of the disorders that could happen. Other areas that are other disorders that may have the involvement in the default mode network include major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, right? Those show increased connection between some default mode networks and specific regions of the limbic system, which, if you know something about depression or bipolar disorder, that makes sense. There's going to be a stronger connection between the parts that make us ruminate and think about ourselves and our emotional centers. That's why we end up thinking so much about the negative stuff we think about in those disorders, right? So again, yeah, the stronger link might mean increased emotional content, overly positive or negative. In the case of bipolar disorder, it could be both. And if you get the depressive phases and also the manic phases, right? You're going to experience that a lot in the autobiographical thoughts in your imagination, right? Especially in depression, there's going to be a lot of those negative thoughts. In bipolar disorder, you can have a lot of those negative thoughts too, but also extremely dangerously positive thoughts, right? If you're in a manic phase. And there's such a thing as depressive interlock, where the focus on that negative keeps you negative in the future. So, or as we talked about earlier, thinking about the past, those nasty things that happened in the past, wishing things were different, all that stuff, focusing on the negative aspects of your past, help you, or is going to keep you feeling negative in the future, And that has to do with the connections in the default mode network as well, and connection to other brain areas like the limbic system or the salience network. So people with obsessive compulsive disorder also show some increased connection between the medial prefrontal cortex and the what's called the ventral striatum, otherwise known as the nucleus accumbens, right? This area, the ventral striatum or the nucleus accumbens, is seen as responsible for habit formation, which, if you know something about OCD, is basically an extreme disorder around habit formation and needing to do certain things for no apparent reason they often can't put their finger on, right? But the nucleus accumbens has a lot to do with that. Okay, habit formation and maintenance, especially in drug use. Like if you're looking at drug addiction, like the nucleus accumbens is absolutely what's driving that. Like that is locking that habit of taking that drug in really strong, and one of the reasons why drug addictions can be so hard to kick, not just because it changes the way your brain works, but also because your nucleus accumbens is building up such strong pathways in your brain around the behaviors of taking that drug that there's just another layer of difficulty in quitting that drug in the first place. It's not only just the feeling you get from the drug, but over time it's no longer the feeling you get from the drug, it's just the ritual of doing it. It's the drive to do it. It's the habit to do it, You desire the drug even though you no longer want the drug. That's where that piece comes in. But also indicated in OCD and the people with OCD and their connection between the the default mode network and the ventral striatum or the nucleus accumbens also. Social media makes me feel old. Welcome in. Good to see you. People with chronic pain, right, which can often go along with depression and other disorders. People with chronic pain exhibit higher connectivity between an area, or the medial prefrontal cortex, again here, these three areas, and an area we haven't talked about too much called the insula, which is shown here, right? If you were to kind of cut away this area of the brain, which they've done here in this picture, this area of the cortex, you'll find another smaller area of the cortex inside here. These are the insular lobes, right, or the insula, okay? It's in the temporal lobe, where along the lateral fissure, where the temporal lobe goes in. And there it kind of folds in even further, and that's the insular cortex, okay? So the insula is responsible for a lot of our interoceptive feelings, or our internal feelings, especially emotional ones, including our subjective feeling of pain, our negative feelings or negative emotions and things like that, right? Typically increased activity in the insula goes along with, depression, chronic pain, things like that, increased negative feelings, usually negative stuff too, right? Maybe you see it, but you don't often hear about increased insular activity and lots of positive feelings. Not so much, right? Also, disorders like ADHD, for sure, I would think. Schizophrenia, possibly PTSD. They might include some differences and difficulties in the default mode network as well. Okay. All right. Let me catch up with chat here. If I burn away some of the connectivity between the medial prefrontal cortex and the insula, will that reduce your chronic pain? That's kind of the hypothesis, yeah, is kind of changing the connection between those can reduce not only chronic pain, but also help depression. Yeah. I suppose by burning it away if you want to, but also by changing it via therapy, meditation, things like that, medication, exercise. Those are all kind of hypothesized, at least, and shown in some research to work in similar ways. Yep. But yeah, that can definitely turn down the volume on those kind of things. Absolutely. Good to see you. Social media makes me feel old. How you doing? Welcome on in. What's new? What's good? Hope you're doing well. So it gets affected by a transcranial magnetic stimulation. If they choose to target that, yeah, they can. I guess depending on how you calibrate it, it could either increase area in a part of the brain, or it could decrease area in a part of the brain. So you could use it to decrease activation there, sure. Yeah, depends on the part that they're targeting now. LaserCat TV, welcome in, my friend. Can we get a shout out for LaserCat, please? If y'all enjoy a positive stream with a wonderful lady who does some singing and some playing of the ukulele and also some gaming sometime, please go check out LaserCat TV. She's a great person, very positive. A pleasure to have run into her on the Twitter sphere and find her on Twitch as well. She's good people. Go check her out. I wouldn't be shouting her out if she wasn't. I will do the shout out. The mods are away, the streamer will play, as they say. Boom. Like I say, go check her out sometime. She's good people. You want to go watch LaserCat. She's good people. Can't wait for Fridays as social media, kind of in a bit of a holding pattern at work. Why is that? And what's new? What's good, LaserCat? How you doing? What brings you by? Besides just want to say hi, which I appreciate. What's new and what's good with you? Anything fun on the horizon? Any plans via stream? What were you doing last on the stream? This is music and performing arts, but what were you doing? Were you singing more? Were you playing the ukulele more? Or what were you doing? Doing both? Good boy. Love you. It's been a while since we've seen a quest. Has it just not been started? It wasn't started. Feel free to join that quest if you guys want to get little fat boy a treat. He's waiting over here so patiently. Social media makes me feel old, says, oh, lawyers are reviewing paperwork. Yeah, it's going to be a while. Reading is I say, a bottleneck of a lot of information synthesis at this point, I would say. Reading is a relatively slow process compared to how quick research is going and the making of that information, you know, the discoveries that are written down, all that stuff, that you know, the reading of it and assimilating it visually like that is a bottleneck at this point, I would say, for a lot of people. Yep, I would say so. There's the next neuroscience question also. What cranial nerve innervates most muscles of movement in our face? Hope you're doing well, LaserCat. Good to see you. Welcome on in. Hope you're well. Like I said, go check her out sometime, please. She's got a wonderful singing voice. She's pretty good at thrashing on the ukulele. Also play some games once in a while. Any of that's your jam, you want to go check her out. She's good people. Wouldn't be shouting her out if she wasn't. Okay. And I see you guys took out Siamese the Guinea, which means this little fat one right here gets a treat. And you all get some kitty cam. Thank you guys for donating again to Fat Boy's Fat Belly Fund, helping to keep him the fattest little lab assistant on Twitch. He appreciates it. I appreciate it. You all love it. It's a win-win-win. Indeed, Draco the ukulele. She does indeed play it. You want to go check her out? She's good peeps. She is indeed. His little fat boy. He's a good boy. He's got that bum leg now. It is cool. It is cool. She's good people, like I said. If you're sick of listening to the same old, we'll throw her on and let her serenade you. She'll do it. She'll freaking do it. Okay. All right. On to the next slide. So we've been talking about this a little bit. Shaping the DMN, or shaping our ability to focus on ourselves versus the outside world, right? All that business. So meditation, as our friend Gemini was saying earlier in this, meditation in research has been shown to decrease default mode network activity in regular practitioners of it, right? So it takes time. It's not just do it once and you're good to go, but you know, in regular practitioners of, at least in this study that I saw, in regular practitioners of meditation, default mode network was lesser when at rest, quote unquote, or rather not engaged in a outwardly focused activity. And also when engaged in an outwardly focused activity, right? When they compared those to the default mode network activity in people who didn't regularly meditate, right? Which seems to suggest that people that meditate regularly, or kind of spend some time purposely engaging that default mode network and, you know, working through stuff and exercising that part of the brain, will have an easier time shifting over to other networks of the brain when they want to have a more external focus, right? So, that is a interesting piece of research. Meditation's relaxing? Yeah, it is. It is. It can be. Many beneficial effects too. It doesn't seem to work for everybody, or at least many people claim it doesn't work for them. And meditation isn't just mindfulness. There's a lot more to it than that. Meditation doesn't have to be mindfulness. It can just be sitting and thinking about as little as possible. You know, there's many different schools of meditation, and they all seem to have beneficial effects of stimulating your frontal lobes and helping you be better at controlling not only your attention but emotional regulation and all that stuff as well. So there are definite benefits to it. I think many people just never consider it, and maybe they should. You know, I should probably consider it more. So another study demonstrated that cognitive behavioral therapy, a typical form of therapy that people go through when they have different mental illnesses like depression and all those kinds of things. But anyways, CBT in people with OCD specifically, and people with obsessive compulsive disorder, that kind of led to beneficial changes in the connection between their default mode network and their frontal parietal control network. So they're better, that kind of implies they're better able to shift their mind away from those anxious and perseverative thoughts that come with OCD and move on to engaging other networks that might make them more productive throughout their day, right? Kind of put them more in control of that, which as a person with OCD might feel they need to do those things that they are anxious about or else, you know, they're not really in control of that. It becomes a compulsion, right? This seems to suggest that CBT rewires the brain in such a way that makes that compulsion more under their control and less needing to be done less, you know? Also, of course, more research needed to kind of solidify these potential connections, but those are things that are being looked at, okay? Definitely, for sure. Definitely. So this is the tip of the iceberg here. I definitely want to add more to this in the future when I do this talk again, but these are some things that I found in recent studies that have been looked at, you know, different types of therapy and also the default mode network. And I'm sure there's a connection between this network and antidepressants. I mean, I'm sure that there's a long-term connection between that as well. That wouldn't surprise me at all. So, and here's something that I haven't done before, but here are my sources. If you guys want to go look at the studies that I used to come up with this talk and give you the information contained therein, okay? Here are the different sources that I used. There's one website, one blog, and then a lot of mostly public access journals. So there's that. I'll leave this up so you guys can see it while I catch up with chat, okay?